Upravo smo počeli snimanje, za one koji nisu saglasni sa snimanjem mogu napustiti webinar. Moje ime je Dino Kuribilović, ja sam službenik za kampanje u predstavništvu Fondacije za pse Dog Trust. Biću vaš današnji gost i biću vaš današnji domaćin ovog webinara. Danas je sa nama Nicola Ackerman, koji je glavni veterinarski tehničar pri Plymouth grupi sa diplomom Hartford College-a. Nicola trenutačno završava postdiplomski studij. Zamolit ću vas samo da držite vaše mikrofone ugašene, molim vas, tokom ove prezentacije, kako bi dali prostor našem današnjem predavaču da prezentira bez ometanja. Dakle, Nicola je trenutačno na završnom postdiplomskom studiju iz polja, moglo bi se prevesti naprednog veterinarskog njegovateljstva pri Glasgow univerzitetu. Nicola je poznati i cijenjeni stručnjak iz polja nutricionizma i njegovateljstva, autor je mnogih publikacija od kojih bi svakako preporučio svima da pogledaju The Consulting Veterinary Nurse. Pored ovoga, Nicola je osvojila i mnoge nagrade za svoj predani rad i veliko mi je zadovoljstvo što danas imam priliku da je predstavim vama. Današnja tema će biti Homemade Diets for Pets, odnosno What should I feed my pet? Pa s tim ćemo, da ne duljimo, prebaciti na Nikolu da prezentira današnju temu. Nicola, I did a short presentation of you in the local language. We can see your PowerPoint presentation, and then you can continue with the lecture.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. I've been asked to sort of talk to you about what food should I feed my pet, and it's a tricky sort of subject to cover because there's so much information that's out there, and it's also difficult from a point of view that what may suit one pet, one dog, one cat might not suit the next one. So there is a little bit of trial and error in you know, when we look at these things. So this is something that we use in veterinary nursing and the veterinary profession altogether, and it's a pyramid looking at what information is out there and what type of information is the most important. And I've put this here because there's so much information regarding nutrition out there. It is so difficult to find what is correct, and everybody has their own opinion, and I'm sure if you go onto the internet you can find comments and bits of information that would be for feeding a certain way and against a certain way. The problem is we need to actually find really good scientific evidence behind feeding those certain ways before me as a veterinary nurse, as a nutritionist, can recommend these things. So this pyramid that we use, the quality of evidence, you can see there at the bottom you have background information and expert opinion. So people's opinions of things are at the very, very bottom. But remember, that also includes me. My opinion and the information that what I think about nutrition is right at the bottom. It then goes all the way up to sort of case-controlled studies and all these things and systematic reviews at the top. So when we talk about food, just remember everyone has their opinion. It may or may not be correct. And just because it's on the internet doesn't mean that it's actually, correct. One of the things I think is really also important when we talk about nutrition is to see what that person's agenda is. So I've written there that I have no conflict of interest, haven't, and I've never worked for a food industry, a food manufacturer or anything like that. I am very much a vet nurse that has a really good, strong interest in nutrition, and we'll go from there, really. So if we're looking at home-cooked diets, one of the things that we're seeing in the UK, we've seen this in the States as well, is that lots and lots of people have actually started to go away from feeding commercial foods and are now actually recommending, or they're doing it themselves, they're making their own home-cooked foods, their own home-cooked diets. And this is a little look at some home prepared food, and Waltham, which, yeah, they are a pet food manufacturer, they looked into home cooked food. So you could always argue there's a little bit of a bias there as well. So they looked at what majority of people would cook their dog or their cat if they were cooking food at home. So most people would feed a chicken and rice with a few bit of vegetables in. If it was a dog, if it was a cat, for some reason, we tend to feed fish. So, you know, and this is what they found in a range of these diets, that the home cooked dog diet, you know, the ones that were chicken and rice based, you know, there wasn't enough vitamin B and E. They needed more zinc, you know, and you can see that it's quite self-explanatory. So if you fed the same diet every single day, we would become deficient in these things. And our diets ourselves as human beings are not brilliant. You know, how many of you eat your 5 portions of fruit and vegetables every single day? Obviously, as we get older, once you hit the sort of 60 years of age, it actually goes up to 10 to 15 portions of fruit and veg a day. How many of you are actually eating all of that? The thing with home cooked foods and with our own diet is what makes it balanced diet is variability. So we're eating different things each day. And if we eat different things each day, there is a potential to reduce any deficiencies. So home cooked diets can be really difficult. They're really difficult, you know, from a time point of view, cooking them correctly. Different cooking techniques as well will either reduce the amount of vitamins and minerals sometimes that are in the diet as well. There's a couple of studies looking at home cooked foods, and a lady called Jennifer Larson in 2012 looked at home cooked diets. And there's actually a company called Balance It. They're an American-based company, and you pay a subscription, and what they do is they can formulate a home cooked food for you. But what Jennifer Larson's group found is, even though people were given a perfectly balanced and formulated recipe, a very, very large portion of the general public didn't stick to the recipe. They had what was called diet drift. And you know, you find this yourself. I'm sure you've all got a favorite recipe for, I know, let's take spaghetti bolognese. It's quite a commonly used dish. I'm sure every household, every person that's listening to this webinar, you put your own little twists on the recipe. You know, do you put Worcestershire sauce in it? Some people will put carrots in it. Some people will put little bits of celery in it. You will drift away from the original recipe. And if that recipe has been formulated to be balanced, by changing things out, maybe you've run out of pasta that day and you think, oh, let's put rice in instead, or, you know, something like that, it moves away. And then that's where we get these inadequacies in the diet, these macro and micronutrients. Macronutrients are things like protein, carbohydrates, fat. Micronutrients are your smaller things, your minerals, your vitamins, and so on. It's another study that was done by a gentleman called Mike Davies here in the UK in 2014. And what he did was he took a recipe that was in the back of a Royal Canin veterinary diet book. And it was published, it's out there, you can have a look at it. And what he did was he gave this recipe to, I think it was like 9 or 10 of his own registered veterinary nurses that he worked with in practice, told them to go off, make this recipe, bring it back, and they analysed the food that was made. Now, this was for a diet for a dog or for dogs that had kidney disease, renal disease. But what he found was the main protein element of this diet came from mincemeat. And what he found was some of the nurses went out and bought actual steak, you know, beef steak, and minced it. Some of them just went to the local supermarket and bought minced meat, which was actually a combination of beef and pork. Some of it had 5% fat, some of it had 10% fat, some of it had 20% fat. how it was cooked, it said 500 grams of mincemeat. Some of the nurses cooked the meat and then weighed it and put 500 grams in. Some of them took 500 grams of meat and then cooked it. And how it was cooked was variable as well. So what they did in this study was analysed all these different things and actually found that only one of the diets that had been cooked was actually suitable for dogs that had kidney disease. So even though the diet, the recipe that they started with was perfectly formulated and everything, because the ingredients were slightly different. You can imagine beef, cattle that was raised in the EU might be different than cattle that was raised in Argentina. We might have different micronutrients in the meat. So there was huge variances there. So home-cooked rations, home-cooked diets can have their place, but fed long-term can actually have quite a few deficiencies there. So obviously for balance, I want to sort of show you that home-cooked foods can have their positives. They're easier to cook. You might feel a bigger bond with your pet if you do it. You know what's going into it. I think it's also important that we, balance this conversation out and actually look at other foods that are out there. Raw pet foods is something that there's, the massive growth across the whole of Europe, Australasia, across the US of A, massive. There's so much money in raw food. The marketing behind it is amazing. The same as other commercial pet foods. And we need to remember that whether it's raw or cooked, it's still a commercial market. There's still money to be made from it. The thing that differentiates with raw food diets for pets is that you can get obviously commercial pet foods that are made, but you can also go to the supermarket yourself and buy the raw ingredients. In the US of A, the Food and Drug Agency has actually put a "do not do this" stamp on it. They've actually highly recommended you do not feed raw contaminated food to pets. And the reason for this being is the same as why you yourself wouldn't go and eat raw chicken or whatever meat source it is. There is that potential for contamination. There's also myself as a registered veterinary nurse, as I have an obligation almost for public health. And I can't, as a registered veterinary nurse, recommend anything that potentially could harm public health. So we need to be aware of this. There's two studies there that I've quoted. They're widely available if you look on Google Scholar or something like that. They found that 80% of a lot of these raw food diets will be contaminated with things like salmonella, Campylobacter. We've had a few quite predominant cases in the UK of Campylobacter poisonings where they've actually caused, we call it coonhound paralysis. It's an American thing that these dogs do come almost paralyzed from the Campylobacter. So there's a big public health responsibility, not just picking up the stools, but obviously from worming these animals, making sure we're worming them regularly as well. We can also get contaminations in commercial dry foods as well. And, if we're talking about balancing the argument, it's important that we're also stating that, yes, dry foods can be contaminated, as can semi-moist foods. Any sort of commercial diet can potentially also be contaminated. And this is one of the reasons, one of the recommendations that I will give you is that if you are using a commercial food, whether it's wet, dry, it comes in tins or pouches, to use a company that batch tests their food. And what that means is they don't test their recipe to make sure that it's balanced, that it's got the right minimum and maximum amount of vitamins and minerals, but they're testing every batch of that food that they make, because obviously the ingredients will change slightly, like we've already discussed. So good food companies will test every single batch. And that's really the sort of food company we want to be using. There's been a lot of discussion about contamination of commercial pet foods with something called melamine. And this also happened in China in baby formula about 10, probably about 15 years ago now. I remember when my daughter was a baby, we were limited in the UK to only buying 1 tin of powdered milk at a time because there was such a shortage of it because of the contamination of melamine. So melamine is the thing they make plates out of. Also, it's a type of plastic, but it contains lots of nitrogen. And what some people were doing, very unscrupulous people were doing, was adding this to pet foods, pet treats as well, to increase the nitrogen, because on the label that means it infers that there's more protein in the food. But it's obviously cheaper than putting meat protein in. And this is where labeling becomes really confusing. What happened then was the melamine combined with another chemical in the animals and caused these animals to have renal failure. And this was found a lot in a lot of dog treats. So contamination can happen in dry, in wet, in all sorts of foods. Make sure you use a food company that tests all of their food. One of the things that I think is really, really important if we're looking at contaminations of food and what sort of pet food to use is to also have a little look at how you store your pet food at home. So if any of you have got itchy dogs, I have a West Highland White Terrier, a little Westie here at home. He's very itchy. He's always got allergies. He's always scratching. And he's allergic to dust mites and house mites, which are almost impossible to get rid of in your house. They are everywhere. I'm sorry if you're itching at home, but they play a really important part. The problem is if you have an itchy dog, is these dust mites are everywhere. They're also in your pet food. These storage mites, these dust mites are in grain. So even if we cook grain, those little, imagine if you cooked a chicken, it's still chicken. If you cook a dust mite, it's still a mite, even though it's, it's not alive, it's still there. What happens is these dogs will become itchy to these dry foods. They will still have this type of allergy. And this is why a lot of people, when they move to things like raw foods, because they're frozen or they're grain-free, the dog isn't itchy anymore. It's not because the food is better, it's because it's devoid of these potential mites. So it's really important if you're feeding dry foods that you store the food well. So have a little think, how do you store your pet food? So do you keep it in the plastic bag it's come in? Do you decant it into a bin like these things here? How we store our food is really, really important. And again, these lovely people have done some research, they've done some studies, and they found that actually when you open your bag of dog food, it won't have any mites in it. But if you leave it open, they can become contaminated pretty quickly. And you can see there from what I've written, after a sort of, I think this is like 4 to 6 weeks, 6 out of 10 of food in the paper bag were contaminated and so on. One of them in a plastic box. So if you are going to use anything, use a plastic box. But when you get to the end of that plastic, you've used all the food, what do you do? Do you wash it out religiously? Do you really give it a good clean before you put the next bag of food in? Or do you just top the bag of food on top? Likewise, do you go to a pet store and do you buy a bag of food, or do you scoop some of the food out or some of the treats out? Again, there's more potential for contamination there as well. So when you buy your pet foods, if you're really worried about these sort of things, tinned food, pouches, no issue at all. If you're using dry food, it's important that you don't have, or you buy a bag that's 30 days worth of dog food or cat food. And then after a month, you buy another bag. It reduces that contamination down by a lot. make sure you're using these, you know, the container it came in or something, and that you clean it out. Also, how often do you clean your dog bowls, your cat bowls? You know, do you, again, wash them out really, really well? Do you pop them in the dishwasher and put them on a really, really high heat? All of these things are really, really important. One of the things I get asked a lot about as well is dental health, the health of the teeth. And there's something that we can use as veterinary professionals called knowledge summaries. And basically what these knowledge summaries are is that somebody has gone out and looked at every single piece of evidence that is out there and then written us a knowledge summary. And what that means is that individual vet nurses and vets and people that give advice don't have to go and trawl through these hundreds and hundreds of studies that are out there. Just one person does it and then tells us what we need to say, which makes life a lot easier. So these knowledge summaries are really useful, and we use them a lot. And this knowledge summary was looking at what diet is the best diet to feed to look for dental health in dogs. You know, should we be feeding wet food? Should we be feeding dry food? Should we be feeding raw food? And this knowledge summary actually found that there's absolutely no evidence, no actual scientific evidence out there that says feeding raw is better than feeding a commercial diet in regards towards oral health. So, you know, all these things you know that you can find online saying that raw diets are better, it's just people's opinion. There's no scientific evidence out there that actually supports these things. There's loads of studies looking at specific dental diets, but they always compare them to another dry diet. And some of these dental diets, yes, they will be better than feeding other dry diets. But when we're looking at raw compared to kibble food, that there's no evidence there. So we can't say one is better than the other because the science isn't there to support it. So this is sort of more of a summary sort of slide. You know, what should we be looking for in a good pet food? And I've already said the first one, we need to make sure that the food is tested and quality assured. We need to make sure that every batch that is cooked ticks those boxes for the minimum and maximum amounts of vitamins, minerals, and those macronutrients, you know, the amount of protein that's in there, you know, and all the other things. We also want to make sure the food is formulated by an animal nutritionist. So, you know, someone that knows what they're doing, someone that's qualified in what they're doing. Veterinary surgeons are amazing, but they're not nutritionists, and the amount of nutrition that's actually covered in their course is very, very little. So as someone that's actually done animal nutrition at a degree level would actually, to me, be a little bit better than a veterinary surgeon. Something else we need to be looking at is that the food is what's called a closed formulation. So a closed formulation means that we're using the same recipe for every batch of food that's made. We're using the same source of ingredients. So rather than having the opposite, an open formula would be, okay, chicken from farm A is cheaper than chicken from farm C this time, so we'll get it from farm A. And then the next batch, oh, chicken from farm B is cheaper this time, we'll get it from there. Closed formula recipes, we're going to source the chicken from the same farm, from the same breed of chickens. We have that familiarity each time. What it means that each bag is the same, we're going to get more and better continuity. So closed formulation diets tend to be more expensive because we don't have the let's go for the cheapest option, because we're going for the same option each time. But something else is really, really important, and we do forget this a lot, is how does your pet do on that food? You know, what's their health like? Do they seem healthy? Do they have a nice glossy coat? Are they gaining weight? Are they losing weight? You know, are they healthier? I think it's a really important aspect. You know, there's some amazing but really expensive diets out there that, you know, if I fed my dog on them, he wouldn't do that well, that it doesn't suit him. So I think it's a really important aspect that we're looking at, is just asking yourself, how does your dog or cat do on that food? You know, what do their stools look like? Not a very nice subject to look at, but it's an important thing to be thinking of. I would really recommend weighing your pet regularly as well. If you're lucky enough to, you know, be able to take them to somewhere where you can weigh them, brilliant. If not, you know, adapt a way at home that you can weigh them at home. If you're strong enough and you've got a big dog, you can lift up and stand on your scales and then subtract your body weight from them. You know, whether, you know, you have a smaller dog or a, you know, a cat, and you start them off as puppies and kittens to be able to sit on the bathroom scales so you can weigh them. These sort of things can make a big difference. If you monitor your pet's weight regularly, they're actually more likely to maintain an ideal body weight. And something else to do is to perform a body condition score. So if I said my Jack Russell weighed 5 kilos, that doesn't mean an awful lot to a lot of people, because 5, you know, how big is a Jack Russell? She's tiny, she's really small. And actually, I think she'd be better off at about 4.75 kilos. What a body condition score does is it puts that number into perspective. It's asking you various questions like, can you feel the ribs? Can you see the ribs? You know, have a feel around their shoulders. Does there feel like there's a lot of fat there? Do they tuck in at the waistline? All of those sort of things. So body condition score, it's a bit outside the scope of this lecture, but it's something to have a look online, have a look at the internet, and put in body condition scoring. It's something that we should be doing regularly on all of our animals. So really, in sort of summary and conclusion, the recommendations that people should be giving you need to be given on, you know, science and evidence, not because, you know, they're paid by the pet store to feed, you know, to sell a certain food and all these sort of things. But accessing all that literature can be quite difficult sometimes. It's important that the veterinary professionals that you're talking to are giving sort of unbiased advice about nutrition. And I would always, I'm really bad. I question everything. I really, really do. And I think us as pet owners need to be doing that as well. So if you're looking for advice online, just have a look, you know, where that advice is coming from. All of these sort of things are quite important. So I've made a little bit of time so that we can ask some questions. I don't know if we have any yet.
Hi, Nicola. Yes, we have quite a lot of questions, and you've sparked quite a discussion in our chat room. I haven't seen the chat room, so busy. So maybe we can start off with a question related to rice. Some people had some comments about rice, and also somebody shot in a question asking, is it better to feed my dog with white rice or brown rice? So could you give us some background on using rice as a food for our dogs?
I mean, rice, if you look in any commercial pet food, rice makes up a major, major aspect of the carbohydrate source. The thing is to remember that rice that's in a lot of our wet and dry commercial foods has been cooked about 3 different ways. And some dogs can find rice quite difficult to digest. And I'm sure all of you will have seen some examples where the rice has gone in one end and it comes out the other end and it looks fairly similar. Dogs sometimes find it really difficult to digest, and home meal brown rice will be even more so. And different rices will have different, what we call glycemic indexes. And weirdly, basmati rice is meant to be the best one from a glycemic index. Human diabetic patients are always recommended to feed that one. But some dogs will do well on rice and some dogs won't. There is no reasoning behind it. It's all down to their digestive system. It's down to the what's called the microbiome, so the microbacteria that's in that digestive system, and we just don't understand it enough yet to be able to give an actual answer.
I'm sorry, can I ask a question?
Dina, I think you're still muted.
Sorry.
There we go. I can hear you.
Okay, good. So there were some questions coming in about rice as well as you were talking about it. So we'll leave that for the second part. The next questions that came in is, can you please offer advice on what homemade food can I give a dog which is prone to having struvites, magnesium crystals in his bladder? The dog is eating solely special factory food for preventing struvite crystals, but I would like to supplement it with some homemade food. What do you suggest?
It's difficult because as soon as you supplement an actual diet that's for a specific reason, you're going to dilute the effectiveness of that diet out. And dogs on struvite diets are normally on struvite diets, obviously because there's this stone there. There's normally a bacterial infection there. Once that's cleared up, we just want to prevent it from happening again. It's one of these questions, it's quite difficult to answer because it depends on why those struvite started in the first place. I normally wouldn't recommend adding in homemade foods. It will increase the likelihood of those stones from reoccurring, especially if you're on a specific diet already. These diets tend to be quite high in fat, so we need to make sure that you know, we're keeping that balance that's there.
Okay, good. In terms of the rice question, somebody asked, what's better than rice, quinoa or buckwheat?
Okay, so I don't have much experience in feeding homemade foods because it's not something that I recommend. I don't think that we can create a truly balanced nutritional diet from solely home feeding. Different carbohydrate sources, so whether we're using rice or pasta or the buckwheat. Some people will use things like beet or pumpkin. Pumpkin's really popular as well. Again, it's one of these things that it's a try it and see. Some dogs will do really well on one carbohydrate source and some won't. So it would be trial and error with that individual.
Okay, good. Let's move on to the next one. Which bones can dogs eat and which not, or should they eat at all?
No, they shouldn't eat any at all. Trust me, I've been in vet practice for 26, 27 years. I have fished more bones out of dogs than anything else of every single variety known to man. Don't feed bones to your dogs, please.
Okay, the next one, what supplements should I add to make homemade meals nutritionally balanced?
It's difficult to say. Again, I wouldn't feed a homemade diet because you have to supplement. You have to know what nutrients are in it to know what's deficient to add things in. You know, if you are going down the route of feeding a homemade, home-cooked diet, then you know you are going to need a multi-supplement, and that's obviously dependent on what you can source in your country.
Good. Well, during the discussion about food, some people asked what would be the best food, the food that you would propose for them to use for their dogs.
Okay. You know, there's several food companies out there that I know that are in your country. I don't know every single food company that are, you know, that's over there. The main ones that I know that are Europe-wide would be your Purina and Hills and Royal Canin and those types of ones. Purina is the world's biggest seller of dog food. You know, they make 40 to 50 types of different cat and dog foods. and they'll have different ranges of dog foods in different countries, so it's almost impossible to say. But what you're looking for is that the food company you use, make sure that they batch test every single batch of food that they make. So we're making sure that we're not getting deficiencies and the other way, that we're not getting too much of certain vitamins as well. That's really important.
This question is, what do you think about vegan diet for dogs?
There are vegan diets out there. Hills and Purina and Raw Cannon make them. Dogs are biologically able to, they're omnivorous. They can, you know, very easily survive on a vegetable-based food. Cats cannot. They are obligate carnivores. They need meat in their diet to get an amino acid called taurine, an essential fatty acid as well called arachidonic acid. So they have to have meat. Dogs are able to survive on vegan diets, but they still need to be balanced, and we need to make sure that they're batch tested each time.
We have another one which is more on the vegan side. Is coconut oil good for my dog?
Is what, sorry?
Is coconut oil good for my dog?
So a bit like fish oil, coconut oil contains a lot of different types of essential fatty acids. And what they found in fish oils and what they found in coconut oils is there's one very specific type of essential fatty acid that can be of benefit. And in fish oils, this essential fatty acid is called DHA. And in coconut oils, it's one of the omega-3. I can't think which one it is off the top of my head. But it's that oil in very high amounts that is beneficial. So if you want to use coconut oil or fish oil, you have to use huge amounts of it to get that one oil to be beneficial. So yes, coconut oil is beneficial. Yes, fish oil is, but you need to use a lot of it. It's better and is easier to find a supplement or a diet that has those specific oils in at the concentrated amount.
Good. There's a few more questions which are more specific to homemade diets, but I do not want to go over our time limit, our set time limit. So we're going to end the presentation here. If there's anything else you would like to inform our guests today about, then feel free. Otherwise, this is an opportunity to say bye to everyone, and we're going to wrap up. Nicola, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, we're going to wrap up.
Okay, cool.
Assume, yeah, okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Dragi svi, hvala vam što ste izdvojili vaše dragocjeno vrijeme da budete danas tu sa nama. Hvala vam što ste bili ovako aktivni u chatu. Za vas koji niste dobili odgovore na vaša pitanja, evo, prikućemo sva vaša pitanja i poslati Nikoli na mail, tako da evo, nadamo se kad njoj vrijeme dozvoli da ćemo imati odgovore, pa ćemo vam poslati sve, jer imamo sve vaše mailove. Još jednom hvala i ugodan dan želim. Thank you, Nicola. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.